are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Kathy Little. I'm the Client Relations Manager here at Product Space. We have another great Quickbytes topic today, which is using shared teams to optimize Windchill performance, which will help eliminate administrative overhead and conserve system resources. With today's economic constraints, I'm sure everyone is interested in shared teams. We have quite a few in attendance today. Also, we would like to hear from you about your PLM environment. We've already heard from some, and it's been interesting to see what your PLM environment looks like. You can send us a note at my email address, which is on your invite page, and we would be thrilled to hear from you. At this time, there should be a poll on your screen, and we will give you a moment to answer, and we certainly appreciate your response. As always, phones will be muted during the presentation, but you can post your questions in the chat room, and we will answer them during the Q&A session. We will now begin our presentation with Ravi Dharmalingam.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks for everybody for joining today's session. So today's topic is about shared teams in Windchill. It's actually a fairly simple feature that you can enable out of the box in Windchill, and depending on your environment, it could yield quite a bit of improvement in your system performance. So we'll talk about the functionality initially, and then we'll go through the implementation process, how you would go about setting up contacts with the shared team, and then the process for migrating existing contacts into a shared team framework, and then we'll wrap up with sharing a customer experience that we have and some best practices. So a shared team is nothing more than a common team that you create at the organization level, which can be shared with all the contexts in that organization. So you could use shared teams either standalone, or you could use it in combination with local teams, and we'll talk about both of those options further. Shared teams can help in easing system administration of team memberships. So essentially, you have only a single place where you need to update role memberships and don't have to worry about having to update them in each individual containers. I know some of you are all probably using groups for the role references, so which kind of buys you the same kind of functionality, but the problem with that approach is if you have identical memberships and you're having groups assigned to roles, the system is still creating a pseudo group for each role in a context, and if you have a large number of contexts, that could lead to performance issues. And shared teams help us avoid that issue. So one other thing to note is when a context is using a shared team, the shared team manager is the context owner. As we all know, like the product manager or the library manager and the project manager are like privileged roles in contexts which assume ownership of those contexts. But when you use shared team, whoever is assigned to the shared team becomes the context owner. And you can use shared teams with products, libraries, and with projects. So here's kind of a schematic overview of how the information is structured. So you have the shared team that you create at the organization level. It could have its own collection of roles, and then you could have a local container team on a particular context that inherits from the shared team, and the membership for that team is actually going to be a union of both the shared team and the local team. And as we mentioned already, you also have the option of just creating a non-extendable product, which is directly using the shared team, and there are numerous as well. To create a shared team, you would go to the organization teams page, and then you create it from there. You assign it a name. When you create a shared team, you again have the option of either allowing it to be extended or not. And if you create a shared team that's not allowed to be extended, any context that's created from that shared team will not have a local team. So essentially, it would be a non-extended context which only points to the shared team. Managing team memberships in a shared team is very similar to how you do it for your local team, local context. Essentially, you access it from the organization teams page, and you can add roles and members from that page. The only thing I wanted to note again is the shared team manager is a privileged role in a shared team context, and it basically will become the context owner for any context that inherits this shared team. So to use a shared team, when you create a context, you have an option to select the shared team in the creation wizard. If you select that option, the system maps this context to the shared team. And again, I think there is another option here to either make this an extended context or not. So when you select the option, allow roles and or members to added locally, it will create a local container team. And if you don't select that option, it will not create the local container team. So you have this option in two places. And when you use a shared team, private access is not allowed. So the checkboxes with private access would actually be disabled. So when you create a shared team, the system is actually creating a shared team domain in Policy Administrator for that shared team. And all the contexts that are created under that shared team would be children of that domain. So that this is something to note when you, particularly if you're looking at migrating existing contexts into a shared team framework, you have to move any access control policies that you have under the PTM domain or under the project domain to the shared team domain. Otherwise, I mean, those access policies would be missing. So we talked about two different modes. You can have an extendable context or a non-extendable context. With an extendable context, you actually have two container teams. You have the local container team and the shared team container team, and your membership is actually a combination of both these. And so this has its advantages. So obviously you could have the common roles put in the shared team, and you could have maybe some unique roles that you want per context that you want to keep on a per context basis. So this kind of mode is suitable for that kind of situation. With a non-extendable context, essentially you don't have a local team. So one thing to note about this is if you decide to use this approach, there is no way to re-enable the local team after you've created the context in this mode, or at least there are no tools available at this point to re-enable it. So that's something to consider. But as I mentioned earlier, using the system in this mode, you gain the maximum in performance because you not only are not creating any pseudo groups for the roles, but the system is not even creating another container team for the context. It's basically all the contexts that use the shared team are just pointing to the shared team container directly, and you gain the maximum in performance. So now we'll talk about how you could migrate your existing contexts, and the system actually has some nice tools to allow you to migrate your existing context into a shared team framework, either in the mode of using shared team only or using shared team plus the local team, as we talked about the extendable and the non-extendable modes. So before you do any migration, you need to make sure your shared team is created and your access control policies are migrated over to the shared team domain before you do the migration. So here's kind of high-level migration steps. So you start with creating the shared team, move all the access control policies from the to the shared team domain, and then these are the command line utilities that are available out of the box. So essentially, and I think you can, the documentation has details on what goes in those input files. It's usually like the container name and so on. So the first command, essentially add shared team to context, takes the existing local team, a local context, and moves it into the shared team structure. So it maps the context into a shared team framework moves the domain. If it's a product, it's probably under the PDM domain, it will move the object from the PDM domain to the shared team domain when you run this command. The second command, the fourth option number 4 essentially deletes the local team completely and moves your context to a non-extendable mode into a shared team framework. So before you do that, you want to make sure if that's what you want to do. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, if you switch a context to a non-extendable mode, there is no way you can extend it after that. So there are no tools available to do that. So before you run that, you need to make sure if you don't have any requirements to have context-specific roles for that particular context. Option number 5 allows you to basically delete the common roles from the context and leave the specific roles in that context. So this mode will allow you to basically have the local container team with some specific roles and then move all the common roles into the shared team container. So now we'll talk about a customer experience from our implementation. So essentially, one of the customers where we implemented this functionality had over 5,000 products defined in their system. And each product had about 30 roles, 30 plus roles defined in it. Most of the roles had identical memberships. So they were all mapped using groups and so on. So the customer was managing the memberships using groups. So only a few of the roles in the context were actually needed to be specific to a particular context, and because they were used in workflows for different routings and so on. So this actually was an ideal scenario for using shared team structure. And some of the issues we saw prior to this implementation was there was over 150,000 entries in the WT group table. So as we mentioned earlier, for each role in a local team, Windchill creates a pseudo group behind the scenes, and so that's an entry in the WT group table. And another thing we were observing was the principal cache that you set in the system was getting exceeded all the time, and we were observing quite a few performance issues, including out of memory. So what we did was we created a shared team, which included all the common roles. As we said, out of the 30, about 26 of them were common across the board and did not have to be specific to a particular container. So we moved all those into a shared team. We made sure all the access control definitions were moved from the PDM domain to the shared team domain. And then we ran the migration process that I outlined earlier on to migrate the products to the shared team structure, and retaining only the few roles that were needed on a context basis for that required unique membership on a context basis on the context level. So after we did this migration, the number of entries in the WT group table, in the role principal map, and various other tables in Windchill dealing with access control and team membership dropped significantly. And an immediate benefit was we were able to lower our principal cache substantially, and still it wasn't overflowing like we had seen earlier on. And the out-of-memory issues were resolved, and we also observed quite a bit of improvement in system performance. So with that, I'll just mention best practices from our experience. I think it's best to keep the number of shared teams to a minimum. As I said, I think shared team is a good functionality to allow us to manage teams more easily. But the more shared teams you have, each shared team has a separate domain, and you have to manage policy definitions for each of those domains. So you probably want to keep it to a minimum. Use the option to not allow local team extension when possible. I mean, as I mentioned, I think that's where you get the maximum benefit in performance, because it does not even create a local container team when you use that option. And then you want to make sure your access control policies are completely migrated before you run the migration scripts to move to a shared team domain. Validate any workflow and custom code that use APIs for team membership. we have observed that some of the APIs only fetch local team memberships. So even if you have a context that's mapped to a shared team, some of the APIs only will fetch the local team membership. So you might want to validate the code that you have to make sure that's functioning. And then finally, I mean, though it's fairly simple functionality and fairly easy to turn on, there needs to be quite a bit of caution in implementing this, because some of these changes are irreversible in the sense that if you move something, a context to a shared team, there are no tools to roll back. So though there are benefits to using the functionality, I think there is due diligence that needs to be done to make sure you are structuring information correctly. With that, I turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you, Ravi. That was very interesting. Certainly has us thinking about using shared teams. We will now begin the Q&A session for questions posted in the chat room. As we transition to the Q&A, there should be another poll on your screen, and we appreciate your response to that as well. We'll give you a few moments to answer that as we read the first question. Beginning with the questions now. First question is posted by a participant who was not able to be in the first part of the presentation, so it is a two-part question. And it is, what is major advantages of having a shared team? Why not use context team only?
Yeah, so I think as we mentioned, the major advantage is you are not duplicating information. So when you have context teams, the information is actually duplicated in the database with regards to like your WT group entries, your role principal map entries, and so on. By having a shared team, if there are common roles that you have across various contexts, if you have a shared team, you can minimize those entries in the database and consequently gain from the performance when accessing those tables.
Okay, thank you. Question number 2. Can you explain how shared teams would work for multiple organizations?
So for each organization, has to be managed individually. So the shared teams are created at the organization level. So if you have multiple organizations, you would essentially manage shared teams for each of them on an individual basis. So they will not overlap. They would have to be managed separately.
Thank you, Ravi. That concludes our question and answer session. Thank you for the questions you posted and for your participation. Feel free to contact us here anytime at Product Space. Oh, just a second. We did have another question up here. Can folder level access still be implemented with a shared team?
Yes, you could still implement folder level access control with shared team.
Okay, that does conclude the questions and answers. Feel free to contact us here at Product Space anytime. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a topic you'd like covered in our Quickbytes, you can submit it via the link on our invite page. As always, you can view all our Quickbytes on our webpage at quickbytes.windchill360.com and register for our next topic, PDM Link Jumpstart, as well. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.